and welcome to UNASA and Amnesty's Human Rights webinar. Thank you so much for joining us in this very bizarre period that we're in. It's really important for us to be having conversations like this, and it's wonderful that UNASA and Amnesty have thought to keep their Human Rights Conference going on a virtual platform. So the themes that we'll be discussing today um, are varied but very pertinent given the context of the world today. The themes range from human rights, mental health, unemployment, food security, safety and security, and yes, that's everything. I will be your panel chair for today. My name is Masakho Mafata, and I am a journalism student at Stellenbosch University. I will now hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll start with Demi Rawstorn.
Hi everyone, so I'm Demi Rawstorn as introduced. I recently graduated virtually from Stellenbosch. I completed an LLB degree and I am now doing sort of a postgraduate practical legal training course. I am a long-standing UNASA member and I'm really excited to chat with everyone today and really talk about some really important topics.
Thanks, Demi. We'll move on to Andrea.
Morning, everyone. My name is Andrea Yazbek. I'm currently the interim chairperson of UNASA at the University of Pretoria. So I have graduated in a BCom in Human Resources with majors in Business Management and Industrial Psychology. And I'm currently pursuing a second degree in Politics, Philosophy and Economics, also at the University of Pretoria. So yeah, I'm very excited to chat to all of you on some really pressing issues.
Thank you, Andrea. We'll move on to Grace now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I am currently the chairperson of the University of Stellenbosch Debating Union, and I'm also the SRC manager for Women and Queer Empowerment. Somewhere in between, apparently, I'm a second-year law student. And besides that, yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I don't know what else I'm supposed to say. I hate these things. It's so awkward.
Thank you, Grace. That was perfect. And we'll move on to Holly now. Hi, Holly. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Holly Wilson. I'm currently a third-year international studies student, and I'm on the Human Rights Subcommittee of Amnesty, which has provided me with the platform to actively partake in the protection of human rights, as well as develop my own initiatives. So it's been really beneficial, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thanks, Holly. And we'll move on to Luke.
Morning, everyone. I'm Luke Waltham. I am a postgraduate honors ancient cultures student here at Stellenbosch University. Also a proud long-standing member of UNASA, and I believe in fighting for social justice, human rights, and mental health awareness.
Thank you, Luke. We'll move on to Ola now.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I think let me start by apologizing. I have some technical issues here, so you won't see my beautiful face. And then also just relay a message from Tandile. She said she won't be able to join because she's been having network issues. So yeah, pardon Tandile. And then now to get to me. Hello everyone. My name is Ola. I am there's a lot. Okay, I'm also a long-standing member of both Amnesty and UNASA. I am studying right now a postgraduate diploma in sustainable development here at SU. And then currently I am the Academic Affairs Council chairperson here at the university, as well as, of course, SRC member and executive committee member. So yeah, mouthful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ola. And that's everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, guys. I'm excited to be engaging with you on these very important topics. And I also just want to remind the people that are watching that you are more than welcome to contribute, engage with us, pose your questions. At the end of every theme, we'll have a couple of minutes to address questions that you might raise. So please engage with us through the YouTube chat, on social media. And then we've got Vian, who's our technical person, who will be letting us know when you have questions. So, with that being said, I'd like for us to get right into it. And as I said, the first topic that we'll be discussing is human rights, because this is a human rights webinar, and a lot of the themes that we are speaking about fall under, the broad banner of human rights. So, in the time that we're living in, we've seen, curtailment of certain human rights in South Africa and globally, right? And so the first question I have, and I think I'll pose that question to you, Luke, is do you think that the government's response to COVID-19 has been human rights centered in South Africa?
Wow, I think if I were to answer that in full, it would take me a whole hour, but I'll try my best to keep it as short and sweet as possible. I think the initial response was one based on the urgency of COVID-19. I think if we look at this pandemic, we realize that there are so many ramifications if it gets out of hand with infecting people. So I think the government did take the right response by immediately shutting down the nation's economy and putting us into lockdown in order to protect us from being infected by this disease and by further causing more harm towards our communities, destroying our economy in the long run, and also even causing many deaths. I think if we compare South Africa to countries like the UK and USA, we went into lockdown a lot faster than these first world countries. And we can see that our infection rate is slightly less than theirs. I think their infection rates are ridiculous now, and also their death rates are quite high. So I think government did think about the human dignity and human rights and well-being of their citizens first, which I believe is the good approach and the approach that all governments should have taken. And as a result, we are now in this state now. We do see that there are people who are feeling impatient about it and feel that we need to start reducing these strict measures, which are slowly taking place. But overall, I do feel that the government did take a human rights centered approach. And that is obviously subject to scrutiny and criticism, as any decision is. And yeah, I think I was quite impressed with government's initial approach.
Thanks for that, Luke. And I think just to expand, Demi, I'm going to ask you if you have anything to add onto what Luke has said.
So I just want to touch on a couple of things that Luke said, specifically initial approach, which he kind of said a number of times. We must recognize that our government has taken a life-centered approach. Sometimes we have to question always whether it's human rights in general, but we have definitely taken a life-centered approach, which is incredibly important because governments had two options. They could either take life or they could take the economy. And very few governments got the smack bang in the middle right. And I'm very grateful personally that our government said our human life is so important that we need to do whatever we can to try and reduce our numbers of infections, but also reduce the number of people that die from this. So I think it's really, really important that, when we get super frustrated and we do think, oh, my rights are being curtailed and this is not what I signed up for and this is unfair and all those kinds of things, to remember that we do have incredibly low death rates, and that we should be grateful for, because that's what our government has been fighting for. And I think if I can just add one more note to that, a big thing about this frustration and things, a lot of people don't necessarily know and understand the legality behind certain things. And if I can just put it as a little side perspective of like the Disaster Management Act, for example, your rights are actually suspended. So everyone keeps saying, but it's my right to do this and it's my right to do that. Yes, you do have those rights and freedoms, and we've fought really hard for them. But this act specifically says those rights are suspended until government gives them back to you. And that's a really difficult thing to grapple with.
Thank you for that, Demi. And I want to expand on what you said about the Disaster Management Act and direct the question to you, Grace. Is, do you think that, you know, there's a line when the government is in a position to curtail or suspend certain rights? And is it possible for that line to be crossed? Have we seen that, you know, the government has enjoyed a greater sense of power, knowing that within a democracy they can suspend rights like that? And how do we ensure that we hold them accountable so that we only see the suspension of rights when mandatory?
Hi, thank you so much. So firstly, just to add on to what Demi said before I get to that, is I just want to emphasize the humanness of this entire situation. I think a lot of frustrations, a lot of questions like you're posing as to, you know, where is the line drawn? Why does government have this much power right now? Tends to forget the fact that this is new to the government too. They didn't plan for this to happen. So now and then when there are faults, they do take it with a pinch of salt, learn their lessons and find ways around it. So I think for me, the biggest thing as to why I have faith is the initiative that I've seen taken. I think the initiative is a lot better for me than the possible loopholes that are starting to occur within the current system that's been presented. But then in terms of that power that they have, to answer your question more directly, I think right now the overlap between the power of the executive and the power of the legislature, in terms of those who make the laws and those who are enforcing the laws, we've seen that there was always an overlap, but right now more than ever that bridge has really closed in order to make this as efficiently as possible. And I think that that is something that could possibly be worrisome. But I think that the courts themselves have done a very good job in availing themselves for prominent issues that have occurred. We are seeing ongoing court cases about people saying, you know, we don't have access to certain grants that the government's promising, certain industries that have been shut down going to court. So I think the fact that our government has to justify what they're doing, and that there is this third party in the separation of powers that has the ability to hold them accountable, does give me faith that although there has been a large amount of use of power by the government, I don't think we will get to a stage of absolute anarchy and abuse, because there are certain accountabilities that I think are being currently used.
Thanks for that, Grace. And I really like what all three of the panelists who've spoken have said about the humanness in the response to COVID-19 by South Africa's government. But then I'm challenged when I think about the humanness of refugees and foreign nationals in South Africa, and, you know, the possible exclusion of refugees and foreign nationals in South Africa. And so I'm going to ask Andrea if you can please then expand more on what you think the government has failed in doing to ensure that the human rights of refugees and foreign nationals in South Africa are still, you know, protected the same way that South African human rights are protected, along with the suspension of certain human rights.
That's a wonderful question to pose. So, firstly, I would like to state that it has become very difficult for government to actually monitor the movement of people. We as students can say that we are no longer staying in res where we usually would have, or in our flats. We are staying at home with our parents. So there has been a lot of movement to this set stage of where you are physically staying. So where people in South Africa are physically staying. So I think it's very difficult for government to actually monitor where all of these refugees are currently based, because they're not based where they've entered this South Africa as a state. So that firstly poses a very big problem. And all of these asymmetric or asymmetries in information, because that is a gap that the government no longer knows, causes a lot of uncertainties because government no longer knows how to respond to them. So government doesn't know how to protect these citizens who are from out of or outside of the South Africa as a republic, because they are based in areas where that is unknown. So I think at this stage, government has been focusing more on its own citizens than it has been focusing on the refugees, simply because of citizenship. So I think government has not focused on the refugees as much as they could have. But once again, there's the asymmetry in information. So the question now is, how do we fill that gap? How do we bridge that gap to actually make sure that government knows where these refugees are based and what the current problems are? Because surveys and things like that are also very difficult to conduct. So it's difficult to identify what the current needs are. So that's what I would like to say for now.
Thank you, Andrea. Sorry. And I just want to expand on what you're saying by posing a question to Ola, because yesterday in the online learning part of the webinar, you said something so important, that a lot of what we're saying right now is said in the context of the privileges or lack thereof that we have, right? So we even like this platform, I guess we're privileged in some sense because we have Wi-Fi, we're on Zoom, we've got laptops and things, and we're discussing like very, very real, visceral issues that people are facing that we're not necessarily exposed to, right? And so, Ola, I want to hear how you think that we can, possibly engage with refugees and foreign nationals to find out how to use the privileges that we have to ensure that their human rights are also protected during this time.
Great one. Thanks, Masego. So I think I wanted to just latch on to what Andrea was saying, as well as just tackle the question from your side. One thing that has been important that we have to acknowledge is that government needs to say, well, first of all, it has two options. I think they need to ensure access to food aid and just um, attention towards refugees as well as asylum seekers, or indicate to the general public that they cannot do that at this moment in time. I think should they do that, that's when we come in as citizens of the country, as people who have, if I can put it like that, privilege in other senses of the word, then seek donors to ensure that they at least take up some chunks of responsibilities in ensuring that everyone is seen to. Because I mean, there's no point in sitting down and yes, attending to the citizens, but also just blatantly ignoring one large chunk of the country's people, the country's also economy. It really would be important that the government indicates whether it can or it cannot, so that there can be measures put in place for donors to step up, for people to be allowed to step up, because we cannot also ignore the legislation that also exists that makes us be stationed at wherever places that we are. So I think government should try and ensure that that part of society is opened up so that we can do more. And I think I've been seeing on social media, on TV, seeing more people stepping up, trying to ensure that food aid is a thing, increased awareness about it. But I think there's been also a greater focus on our own citizens, which is not an issue. I just think we can expand on that and be inclusive of other people, our asylum seekers, our refugees as well. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for that. That was a very robust and insightful interaction. You all had such different views and takes on the topic. I think now we're going to move on to the theme of mental health, and we see how, in as you guys mentioned, the suspension of human rights, certain human rights, like the right to movement. We've seen people, as Andrea said, we're all quarantined at home and not at res, and we're stuck in these spaces. We can't really go outside and run unless it's between 6 and 9 in the morning, right? And we know that for a lot of people, exercise or just going outside for a walk helps them center themselves. It's a coping mechanism for their mental health. And so a lot of the legislation, or just the way that we operate right now, has had quite an impact on mental health, um, for people who enjoy being able to move around and be in the outdoors. So Holly, I just want to ask you how you think one should navigate the space of having to be confined at home, and being restricted to only going out in those hours. How do you still keep your mental health intact, given that you can't do the things that you used to do to ensure that you're okay?
I think for me, creating some sort of structure is really helpful. Like, also taking the weekends off after working continuously through the week is also really beneficial. And also just like trying to figure out the best breathing exercise for you or whatever helps you settle yourself. And also just trying to adapt best, because we can't get out of the situation we're in it, so we need to learn to adapt. And also, luckily, I am at home and it is a conducive study environment, and I do have a great support system here. So I think trying to reach out to friends and understand that we're in this together, everyone is feeling, not in their usual flow of space, and very confined, and it is very stressful, and adapting to the whole online learning as well. As Paula said in his video on online learning, a lot of us are feeling very overwhelmed by the workload, and it's just trying to like manage that, keep in contact with your lecturers, let them know where you're at, and yeah, it does suck that we have to stay within that 6 to 9 a.m. frame for exercise. But maybe like if you have a trampoline, go jump on the trampoline or walk around your garden. My parents do it every morning. They're like round laps and laps and laps just to like feel a little bit more free. So it does help. It's whatever works for you, really.
Thank you, Holly. And you spoke about structure and routine, um, and that's been quite the emphasis during this time, along with this idea that try and be as productive as you can, because now you have all the time that you didn't have before, which has been, dare I say, slightly dangerous, because it's it places a lot of pressure on people to perform in very, very difficult circumstances. So, Luke, I just want to know what you think about this whole idea that lockdown is, or the pandemic is a time to enroll in all the online courses and have this routine where you're staying so productive and on top of things. What are your thoughts on that whole idea?
Well, I'd first like to say, with regards to having a structure, I've even gone to the extent of putting a schedule up on my door in my house, just so that one does follow a routine. Because I've been finding that when people suffer from mental illnesses or are just battling with being confined to these spaces, you often just forget that you've got a schedule in your life and that you've got all these various things that you need to do. But with regards to tackling your question, I think there was a quote that was put on Twitter and was also discussed in a workshop recently, that you aren't in your workplace anymore. You're now stuck at home trying to work the best you possibly can in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that people need to understand that it is not possible for everyone to miraculously be able to work to the best of their abilities. In fact, I would strongly recommend that people try to um, separate and space out their days and their weeks with the work that they already have. And I think that universities, workplaces, and even schools need to keep that in mind. I think my department has been great with that. They've already um, postponed our due date for our thesis by a month. So that's amazing. And I hope that other departments and groups are able to do that as well. I don't think it is possible to expect that productivity levels can be high all the time. In fact, I think that's quite inhumane to expect that of people during this time. There are people who are suffering from health anxiety, people who are battling just being at home with certain people, because there could be a lot of factors at play here, having to be forced to be in a space with possible abusers as well. So there are so many factors that you need to unpack. And I think that we as a society need to come to the conclusion that it is not possible for everyone to be as productive as they were when there was no lockdown or pandemic.
Sorry guys, I'm going to have to interrupt here. The meeting is about to end, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the meeting, and then you must all just join the same meeting again, please. Alright, I'm transitioning now. Sorry about that, guys. This is me, Vian the Tech Guy. We're just letting everyone back into the call again, and once they're on the call, the panel discussion will continue again.
Sorry.
It's interesting to see, like, because in normal conferences, there would be other difficulties. And now here we are in a virtual one with these new technical difficulties.
It's a new world, like completely, but it's one that we need to get adapted to very quickly.
100%. And I think that also has created the debate about whether things such as Wi-Fi is a basic human right now. I've been seeing debates around that. So it's quite interesting to see how this has even created so many debates around human rights and what exactly should be added to our list of human rights during this time.
Alright guys, everyone's back on the call again, and I'm going to make us go live again. Are you guys ready? And
yes.
we're going live again.
Welcome back, everybody. You know, Zoom calls and limits and, you know, this new world that we're living in actually also made me think about something that's also become a new normal, is just constantly being in this virtual space. And so we've seen how, in terms of mental health, for example, a lot of psychologists and counselors are offering online sessions, telephonic sessions, in order to, you know, keep supporting people with mental illnesses during this time. But then I remember reading something about how, you know, because we're spending so much time in the virtual realm, we're seeing a lot of people experiencing virtual fatigue, right? And so if you're already tired from having 3 Zoom meetings for school, a house party meeting with your family, and you really need to speak to your therapist, but you can't find the strength to be looking at a screen for another 45 minutes, how does one even work around that? And I just wanted to find out from you, Grace, if what your thoughts are on that whole situation.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. So, first and foremost, I just want to reaffirm that that is something that a lot of people are feeling. I think also the idea of what people need to be doing or should be doing has had such, there's been such opposite opinions about it. Some people saying we need to adapt as quickly as possible, other people saying take your time, it's only natural. Some people saying you should be at your peak of productivity, other people saying, I feel like we should drop out because, and there's no shame in that. And there's so many different ideas, and it comes down to you. And no one can answer anything besides you sitting with yourself to understand how you function and where your life is at right now. Personally, for me, when I was back on campus, I hated studying in my room. Obviously, except exam season because that was the pits. But the reason I hated working in my room is because I needed a psychological thing that when I walk into my room in res, I'm done. My work can end, everything can end, and this is me, this is Netflix, this is just wasting Marty's Wi-Fi, doing nothing and relaxing. And then as soon as I walk out the door, I can put on my game face again and take over the world. And right now, my workspace is my eating space, is my breathing space, is my friend space, is my psychological support space, is my everything space. And it is extremely restricting in a number of regards. And I think for me, what's helped me personally cope, again, I'm saying me a lot because, like I said, everyone just needs to find their individual groove, is changing my environment with little things. So, for example, when I put my hair up and when I have earrings on, that means I'm working and I'm grinding. And, lipstick's on, we're looking great, we're doing the most. But then when my hair's up and like my face is a bit of a mess, it's that, we're just chilling with friends, we can be a little bit more chilled. And then when my hair is like out of the ponytail, then it's like, yeah, we're done. And it's very little things, but I cannot emphasize enough the fact that I have the privilege to do that. There, like Luke has already emphasized quite a lot, there are people who are in abusive homes. There are people where the data that's been given, just downloading all the apps that have now been asked of us, took the 10 gigs, so now they can only work at like 4 a.m. to get the 20 gig night owl, and laptops that only got delivered last week. So people don't even have the opportunity to find themselves because they're literally pulling all nighters after all nighters catching up. So for me, I think the restrictiveness of environment and how people cope is something that is very privilege based, but more so than privilege, it's understanding how you best cope in the environment. And I've just noted a lot of people asking everyone else, what is the answer? What is the answer? What do I do? And although asking for help is very much encouraged, I don't think asking everyone for what the answer to their own life is something that should be encouraged. So it's just about finding the balance of where you are mentally, and again, education, privilege, intersectionality. I can go into like a 2-hour long conversation about intersectionality and mental health, but I've got a feeling that people will not be impressed if we have to end this meeting and rejoin.
Thank you very much, Grace. You touched on a very, very important aspect of just coping during this time and how it's a very individual act. I also just want to grab onto your points about how some people have only just received their laptops, or some people don't have enough data, all those things that come into play. I remember reading an article about how some students at WITS have opted for deregistering because online learning, they're not coping. So, Ola, I just wanted to find out from you if you're aware of any efforts from the university side to ensure that students are not at a loss because of the circumstances that they find themselves in, and that their academic futures are still protected, I guess, by the university.
Yeah. Great one. Thank you, Sejo. So I think if I can start and say if anything, I think on one thing that we have been discussing was I think should we delay the start of online learning? Should we not even do it? Um, you know, those conversations. But I think where we ended up with was that I think we should consider the fact that we would want to produce people to go out into the working world to ensure that they better themselves. And I think we should allow people who would want to be in that circumstance as well, instead of just saying that, oh no, we know the reality of online learning, so let's just shut it down, let's not do it at all. I think we took that into account, and we're like, let's give people the opportunity to see should they succeed, that's also great, but what if they don't succeed? And in that case of the what if, es- I'm speaking now, of course, in terms of Stellenbosch University, the HUMIS regulation. Um, it was decided that this year no one would be subjected, everyone who's registered for 2020 studies, no one would be subjected to go through any readmission um, process should they not have enough HEMIS credit. So I think that's one great step. And I think even better step beyond that, should you want to deregister, you can deregister and you have a guaranteed spot back here at the university as long as you engage with your administrator at the right time, of course. So, of course, you have certain window periods whereby you can deregister or you cannot deregister. So, as long as you adhere to all those things, then everything should be great. And I think we're busy finalizing opportunity for students to rewrite after the exams, of course, if the exams goes haywire for first semester, that you are able to redo your first semester at the beginning of the year, just the tests, of course, beginning of the year 2021, to ensure that you don't fall behind with with your online learning. Especially, I mean, first semester is a very unsure, unstable time. Data, laptops, everything, all of this is new. But if you have a chance to redo it without hindering your academic plans that you have put in place, be it years, months, or whatever, we're trying to ensure that by the beginning of 2021, we can ensure that students have another opportunity to rewrite all of their assessments um, for first semester. So I think we're heading towards the right direction. And based on the engagements with students, they're appreciative of what the university has done. But of course, as I always say, more can be done.
Thank you for that, Ola. Vian's just let me know that we have a question. So Vian, you can.
Hi, our first question is from Nomfundo Mfeka, and she says, can the panel elaborate on the issue of students struggling with the different roles of home, namely student, child, parental figure, and how do we navigate that?
Thank you, Vian. Is there anyone on the panel who'd like to address that question? Very important question. Thank you, Andrea.
Okay. So when looking at the situation that you're finding yourself in, it's very important that you distinguish between things that are outside of your control, things that you have some control over, and things that you can control. So at this stage, the things that you can control is your mindset and your choices. The things that you have some control over is your study, because you can study, but there are some limitations. You have got some control over it. And then the things that you can't control is the situation that you're finding yourself in with COVID. So when we are in this whole situation, once you identify the things that you can control and the things that you can't control, it's much easier to change your mindset on how to approach those things. Because once you think, okay, how am I going to change the things that I can control? The things that you can't control will have a ripple effect and a ripple change. So let's say, let's use the exact situation. Let's say I am studying at home and I've got three younger siblings that are around 5 years old, but I'm busy with my degree and I've got the laptop problem. Okay, I can't control the little ones running around, that's outside of my control. I can tell them to keep quiet every once in a while, but that's like a middle ground. Then you've got the whole laptop issue. That's something that you can't control. So universities have played a role, as mentioned by Tola and Luke. They have played a role in supplying these laptops to us or to some of the students who are struggling. So that is something that you can sort of control. And then the things that you can control is the using your textbook. So you can still pass by using your textbook, but you're going to have to put on in a lot of more effort, but it's not impossible. So once you identify things that you can control, that you've got some control over, and things that you can't control, the whole process just becomes easier because our thoughts become our actions, and our actions become our realities, and our realities become the consequences that result from those realities. So that is where I would say to start with all of this.
Thank you, Andrea. Demi, would you like to add on to that?
Just to add on to that, I think we need to realize that we are all in very different spaces. I'm currently not at university, but I still have a lot of online courses for what I'm doing. And I tutor quite a bit, so I deal with lots of really young children, kids in high school, and I never usually have an interaction with their parents. Now I get phone calls from moms and dads all day, every day long, because their normal hat that they wear is not teacher. But that's not my normal hat either. It's now a hat that I have to wear because teachers have also been thrown into an environment where they now need to teach online, and they've never done that. If I think about some of my lecturers from Stellenbosch, some of them didn't even do PowerPoint because that was too much technology for them. So, we find ourselves in a very different space, and a lot of people who have gone home, which is not an environment that is conducive to learning, because there might be younger siblings, or there are many other pressures that they have to deal with. We have to realize that, like Luke suggested earlier, that schedule you create for yourself is so important. But at the same time, you need to start being more kind to yourself. When you cannot stick to that schedule like you really want to, you need to understand that it is okay, and we will pick up and we will get through it. Because you start something and your lesson started, and all of a sudden your mom is screaming at you, she needs you to do this, or there is a sibling, and things aren't normal. So yes, you can control a schedule, but at the same time you can't control those surrounding factors, as Andrea just explained now. So I think the key to juggling all of those different hats that you now have to wear that you've never worn before is to try and be a little bit kinder to yourself, and know that when things aren't going okay, take a break and get back into your schedule when it is okay for you, and not when somebody else is forcing you to get back into it.
Thank you for that, Demi. We have another question that's come through. So, Vian, you can shoot.
Our next question says, does the panel think the ideas brought forward by the DA could lead to the regression of the country regarding COVID-19?
Sure, spicy. Is there anyone who'd like to answer that question on the panel? Demi?
So the DA have a lot of ideas and are very vocal about them. But like I said to you, I'm coming from a very different background to a lot of different people. So my boyfriend, for example, is a physiotherapist, and he is currently working in COVID wards. He sees the front end of things. Both my sister and her husband were COVID positive and have since recovered. So I'm coming from a slightly different background, and in one side, I can clearly see how lockdown has dramatically affected how our hospitals can cope. So from the one aspect, I go, okay, great, we need to make sure that we're not opening up things too quickly. And then on the other side, I understand where the DA is coming from, and they're coming from many different angles. Some of them I am incredibly supportive of, like the case that they won 2 days ago in the High Court in Cape Town about feeding schemes and about getting food to people who really, really need it. I'm all for that. I am a little bit more hesitant when we go on a, a really martyr type approach where everything must be open, everything is available, we are completely ready. Because when I look at the hospital side, when Nick comes home and he's kind of saying to me, we were only ever meant to have X amount of patients, we have double that now, our entire hospital is already full, where we shouldn't be at that stage yet, and we are running out of PPE. I'm going, okay, what my government's telling me that we have all this stuff and we're ready and we're good to go is not really the case. So it is quite scary when you juggle a government perspective and you have then the opposition saying a completely different story, and then yourself is in a position where you don't always know, and you have to constantly juggle this tug of war.
Thank you for that, Demi. Luke, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd firstly like to say that Demi has raised incredible points here. Looking at it, I've noticed that some of the politics that seems to be involved in this matter seem very reactionary, trying to get it onto the headlines and trying to play on the emotions of people. I think the most important thing that we need to recognize is the justification for a lockdown in the first place is the fact that government wanted to prepare the hospitals and prepare the medical centers so that they are able to support all the infections that are to take place, So I think that needs to be the point of departure when people want to question why we're having a lockdown in the first place, because we can even see in some first world countries, they didn't prepare that at all. They didn't prepare their hospitals or their medical centers or even the equipment needed. And as a result, now they have a huge problem. A lot of hospitals have run out of equipment, run out of beds. There's places like in Italy and Spain where they've even been using ice rinks for bodies to put corpses there. So I think it's very important that the first line, where the first point of departure is actually looking at the reasons why we entered a lockdown. So I think some of the things that the DA have argued about are valid, as Demi have pointed out, with regards to the human rights case where the Department of Social Development wanted to take away some charities and NGOs from feeding people. And I think that was completely bizarre. And of course, our Chapter 9 institution that deals with human rights also agreed with the DA on it. And obviously the court case was won a few days ago. So I think that is a very welcoming decision. But when it comes to their focus on opening the economy all the time, it feels very Trumpian even. A lot of the time, it feels that they're constantly talking about opening the economy and being quite drastic with regards to that. And even discussions recently with regards to opening Parliament again, from what I have recalled, they are the ones who are wanting the most number of members of Parliament to return to Parliament, whereas others want a scaled back number to protect them, especially because a lot of members of Parliament are exceptionally old and are also probably the people most likely to be infected and to even possibly die from COVID-19. So I think that we need to be very critical of any political parties take on this, even the ANC, even the ruling party. I think we all need to are being made and what proposals are being put forward, because remember, at the end of the day, there may always be certain agendas that are pushed. But yeah, that is my opinion. I think in some aspects, the DA have been fighting from a human rights perspective, but we also need to caution this idea of economy over human life.
Thank you for that, Demi and Luke. That was a very important question because, again, it's a reminder, like Demi and Luke have said, to be cautious of how political parties can use this situation that we're in to further their own agendas and to create divisions that we can't afford to have right now. I'm going to pair the two themes of unemployment and food security together because we are running out of time. And also because, they're quite linked if you think about it in South Africa. So because of the lockdown, we've seen a lot of businesses shut down, lose income, and then have to lay off workers, right? And through that, we've seen a lot of people find themselves in situations where they're unemployed, right? And in South Africa, we already have such a high unemployment rate. I mean, in the last quarter of 2019, the youth unemployment rate was sitting at 58.2%, which is very scary, and it doesn't even, factor in the effects of COVID-19. And so yesterday for the webinar, we had Andile Zulu speaking about the 350 grant that has been, that the government will be giving to unemployed people, right? And, this whole debate whether people should be working for this grant versus people should receive this grant as a grant because you don't work for a grant. And then he went on to speak about something that really struck me was the spiritual effects of unemployment, right? So we know that there are people who've been trapped in joblessness for years after they've graduated. And we're constantly told that you need to get a degree so you can get a job. But what does that mean in a society when people have degrees, have the skills, and yet there are no jobs? Surely that impacts someone's mental well-being. And I guess that's what he was referring to when he said the spiritual impact of unemployment. So Holly, I just want to know what your thoughts are on Andile Zulu's proposition that unemployment has an impact on the mental health of people, as well as just the impact of the growing unemployment rates on people's mental health and job seekers' mental health, I guess.
Well, I think for many people, being the breadwinners of a family, not being able to bring an income into the family to feed your kids or just contribute to your livelihood is very demeaning, in the sense that you can't feel dignified in your role in the family or in your community, whatever it may be. So yeah, I think it's very has very negative impacts on people's mental health if they're unemployed, especially, well, not especially, but also for students who have studied year on and then still not getting the sort of future they were sort of guaranteed by studying. It's very, yeah, disappointing, and I think you can feel very like unaccomplished, and self-worth decreases. Yeah, I think it definitely does. It's like a gateway to mental health issues like depression, suicide, anxiety, whatever it may be. Yeah.
Thank you, Holly. Vians just let us know that we have another question coming through.
Hi, Fufu Talks asks, why are human rights so important to the COVID-19 response, and why are equality and discrimination important to the COVID-19 response?
Thank you for those questions. Very important questions as well. Is there anyone on the panel who'd like to address those questions? While we, wrap our heads around the question and find someone to answer them, I think it's as was raised at the beginning of the conversation, human rights have been, we've seen that a lot of the initiatives that the government has used to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic have been human-centered, right? And so that's where human rights come into play. And we know that without humans, there will be no economy, there will be no politics, and so on. So for a society to function, there needs to be humans in that society, right? So it's important to preserve the lives over the socially constructed concepts that we use to govern our society. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to add to that. But yeah, so basically, I think it was elaborated on earlier on in the panel discussion. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to move on to the next point.
Pardon me, can I just say a few words on the
Yes,
question?
yes, Xolo.
Yeah, I just want to touch on, I think they mentioned the importance of human rights during this whole thing. I think also we have seen that uh, time and again, we have been told, of course, that uh, people have the power, or power to the people, democracy, and all those things. But it is it is within these terms whereby power does actually also fall within people's laps. What I mean about that, considering our context right now, very stationed, we're very governed by the Disaster Management Act, if I said it correctly, don't grow me if I didn't. Um, we are very sedentary, we can't go anywhere. If the government piles up too much frustrations on its people, too much limitations, too no access to information, very stringent, and start picking on the human rights and violating those, that's when people start to go towards uprisings, as well as being in uncomfortable states. I think we have to take into account the protest culture of South Africa, very rich one. We really, really are fast to take to the streets. And that's not a negative thing, but that's what I'm alluding to, that should the government violate, or should have the government not realize the importance of human rights, especially in the South African context, we would have just been calling upon um, a lot of negative experiences as a country. And I think we would not be able to afford that, considering that we're trying to focus on rebuilding our economy, trying to focus on lives, we're trying to focus on this, that, and the other. And an unnecessary violation of human rights would definitely be something that South Africa could never afford. But yeah, that's just me on that point.
Thank you, Ola. That was a very good answer to that question. I just want to move us back to, the link between unemployment and then, food security. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw extreme stockpiling and panic buying across South Africa, right? And then after a few days after the lockdown was announced, then grants were paid out, but the shelves were empty and the malls were full, and people had a lot to say about that. And so I just want to ask Andrea, what do you think are the barriers to access, especially in the context of lockdown? Um, we see that not everyone has the means to get the food that they need to ensure that they don't go to bed hungry. We've heard that, roughly 34% of South Africans were going to bed hungry in the initial stages of lockdown, and that number's just increased. So what are the things in place that are holding people back from ensuring that their food's secure?
Okay, that's a very, very valid point. So currently there are a lot of barriers to entry. So entry into the market, entry to access to food, entry to access funds to access food. So naturally with our finances, you can't buy the food that you need. So a lot of problems come in with regard to the grants that are given. So many of these citizens who are reliant on these grants can no longer access them, and it actually becomes dangerous for them to go and stand in the queues to receive the grant, stand in the queues to access the hospitals and the health and safety areas that we have, access to food parcels. All of these things are barriers, and um, it causes citizens to actually weigh up the benefit of, or the opportunity cost of either well, getting corona by standing in a queue to wait for my food parcel, or staying at home and going hungry for a few days. And citizens shouldn't be weighing up these basic human needs. Just, I mean, it's health versus safety. So, and I mean food security. So how do we break these barriers? And that is another question that we're dealing with. Another barrier that there is, as you asked, are basically the travel to and fro. There are limitations on the amount of people who can use a normal bus. Some of the buses aren't running, taxi limitations. I know that there has actually been, there's a store in the Western Cape somewhere, where the store owner actually opened up a part of his shop for restaurants to sell their breads and stuff, because those waiters aren't, getting salaries anymore. And he's actually using the taxis system for transport, which I thought was amazing. And yeah, I would really like to applaud that store owner. But yeah, as I mentioned, there are all these barriers in transport, barriers in queues, barriers in getting to the grants. And the question now would be, how do we actually go and we lower these barriers? Because as Demi mentioned earlier, you had a free market. But now, all of a sudden, because of all of these barriers, it becomes a black market. So people would be buying alcohol freely from the shop, from a store. But now, all of a sudden, because they can't access the alcohol, they kind of have to make their own muti, whatever. And those kinds of things can be dangerous if it's not worked properly. So, yes, that's it from me for now.
Thank you, Andrea. We have a question from the viewers, Sylvian.
Before we get onto that question, we only have 5 minutes left, so I think we should just restart the meeting and then we can continue from there. Sorry about that, guys. So I'm gonna end them. I'm gonna move to standby, and then I will end the meeting. And please join the same meeting. Wow, it has been a very interesting panel discussion, and I do hope you've all been enjoying it. Of course, with our Zoom limitations, we have to start them over again, because none of us want to pay for Zoom Pro, unfortunately. So let me just let everyone back in, and then we can start this conversation again. It won't be much longer now. We're aiming to finish by 20 past, and we've just got a few more questions left. The topic of safety and security, and we will also be taking another question from one of our viewers. Are these all our panel members? Is everyone back? Oh, there we go, Masejo. Alright, and all of our panel members are back, so we are going to continue with our line of questioning. Hi everyone, so we have a question from Kira Alberts, who says, students who are graduating this year will most likely be entering the worst job market in the last 50 years. How do you think this will affect students, families, and our economy?
Grace, would you like to answer that question?
Me.
Yes, please.
Okay. So to say it'll have a negative impact, I think will be the biggest understatement of the century. A lot of the discussions that have already been had have focused on the effects of mental health, of security, and the ripple effects thereof. And I think when we're speaking about unemployment, again, intersectionality is just my word, I apologize. The effects that will then have on your food security, then have on your mental health, then have on your power and family dynamics at home, then have on certain discriminatory effects that occur due to how power dynamics have. happen. I think when looking at this particular wave of graduates going into such a tense market, I think, for lack of a better word, the thing that is giving me hope personally is the fact that this urgency that was created has shown us a lot of holes that have existed. I think a lot of people were comfortable in the bubbles that they had, for lack of a better word again. The idea that no, they go to varsity and they can go back home to a very nice house and there aren't as many issues. I think when looking at how this has been a wake-up call for a lot of people to understand the depth of a lot of struggles that are occurring to the rest of South Africa, and sort of breaking people out of those bubbles. I think that conversation gives me hope in the sense that there will possibly be a call for how to create a more stable way of going forward from then onwards. So in no way am I going to be unrealistically optimistic and say, oh, we see all the problems now, we can all just go in and solve them. But I do think that the way in which we do things has changed, and the fact that we are a generation that has been so encouraged to be adaptable to said change is something that is giving me a bit of hope in an otherwise very unusual circumstance.
Thank you, Grace. When I was in high school, my principal used to say that the jobs that we'll be, going into don't exist yet. And I mean, when she said it, I was like, yeah, okay, cool. But given what's happening in the world right now, I've held on to that because I think it's true. The world's changed so much, and we're going to need a different set of skills. And so, the jobs market as we traditionally know it has changed, yes. And students will be entering, a very different climate, uncharted territory. But because of the uncertainty of this new job market, we don't know like all the different opportunities that this job market could present to us. Having said that, I'd like us to move to the last theme for today's discussion. We are running out of time, and I don't want to rush anything. I'm sure we could have discussions for hours on end. But before I move on to that, Denny, would you just like to say something?
I just wanted to say a quick word. Kira and I actually landed up speaking about this earlier in the week, that when we look at job insecurity, we have to, especially as students, look at the factor of students who are being funded by NSFAS, who previously were not eligible to have any portion paid. And where our climate is going now, more and more families are going to be eligible to be able to claim. And NSFAS is already inundated with applications and that kind of thing. So we're going to see quite a sad decline in university students because people are simply not going to be able to afford university at all, and funding schemes just don't have the capacity to pay for enough students. So as we exit the university to try and find a job, so in come new students, but the families don't have money to pay for that because they have already been through the cycle of losing a job and having no security whatsoever because of the climate we do find ourselves in. And I think it's an important thing for us to just bear in our minds and really try to grapple with how we're going to deal with these kinds of struggles.
Yo, that is very sobering, Demi. Very, very sobering. Something that we should definitely think about. Thank you. So for the last theme, safety and security, I'm gonna jump straight into it and look at this question of brutality and military force in South Africa. Even though we had the World Health Organization and some countries commending the South African government's approach to COVID-19, we've seen the UN calling South Africa out for using extreme force to enforce the COVID-19 regulations. And we recently had the victory of Colin Kosa, who was murdered. And initially, the South African National Defence Force, people who murdered him, were not held accountable. But after a victory in the Supreme Court, I think they were recently dismissed. Four South African National Defence Force members were dismissed. And so I want to ask, who haven't asked? Luke. Let me ask Luke. What do you think about the extreme use of force in South Africa at the moment, and the rhetoric around comparing it to the way force was used in apartheid during the state of emergency, for example?
Well, I think the first thing is it's quite dangerous for some people to compare our current society to apartheid. But I would like to say that the culture within the police force and army are that of apartheid-like tendencies. I said that to Becky Cele himself last year in Parliament, because often, like I think we've seen in the last 10 years, even without this lockdown, when students are protesting, the police intentionally try to intimidate students and then incite this violence that happens between students and police. And we see this brutal way of police shooting rubber bullets at protesters. And now, in this current lockdown situation, it almost seems like there are those in the police and army forces who are trying to abuse this power that they've been given, this additional power, where they can simply just question people. I also saw a video the other day of someone who was, I think, jogging between 6 and 9, and two police officers just threw her into the back of a van. So I think it's those issues that we need to be very careful of, and I think everyone should report police and police who are abusing their powers to IPID. They are the investigating unit when it comes to police abusing their powers. So I think all South Africans should be made aware of that. And I also think when it comes to the army, I initially, before the lockdown even was imposed, there were already there was already video footage of like army tanks and trucks and that already being deployed into underprivileged areas. So I think we also just need to be very aware of the way that police and army forces treat different groups as well, especially the way that they are especially brutal towards poor Black communities and groups. I think we need to keep that in mind and just be very critical of the fact that there are still apartheid tendencies within our military and police forces. And we need to, I agree with the UN, we need to actually criticize that and find solutions to that.
Thank you, Luke. I completely agree with you. It is something that we definitely need to find solutions for. The last question that I have, and I'm going to pose this question to Ola, is around the safety and security of students on campus during this time. So a lot of people at Stellenbosch specifically have gone home, but the university didn't force everybody to go home. So people had the opportunity to stay on campus, right? And so I just wanted to hear from you, Ola, if the safety and security on campus, does it still seem to be a priority? Are students feeling safe? What is the campus security visibility like during this time?
Okay, so first of all, I'm still on campus, so I'm speaking from what I see on a day-to-day basis. I think the one thing that is completely different is that there's no one inside, no students, no people roaming around campus. It's just not the way things used to be. And secondly, I also like to state that technically we're not allowed to like kind of like roam around, so you can't necessarily see when is the campus security truly visible. but definitely, if there's one thing I can say is that they are. I don't know if that transition made sense in any way. Let me elaborate. They are because all residences have kind of like a stationed campus security person there. And I think as compared to before, they are always, especially at those designated stations where, if you can put it like this, were supposed to be back then. Now they are always there at Bosman. You always see them at the corner of Dagbreek. They're always there between Van der Ster. They're there. I stay by the tennis courts. They are always here by the tennis courts, and majority of the students are this side. I think based on my experience, I've literally seen campus security always around, and there's not an issue of enforcing malicious rules or being malicious towards us when we walk around campus. It's literally a hey there, and you go along as you were. I was quite glad to experience that. No force from their side, just genuinely them protecting the environment and us, of course, who are within this environment. So from my side, positive experiences. And yeah, the only thing that I can complain about is just that it's too dark, and of course, there are no students are around. Otherwise, it's been good.
Thank you for that, Ola. And thank you to all of the panelists today. There's so much more that I wanted us to discuss. Grace, I would have loved to engage you more, especially in terms of safety and security and the growing, gender-based violence numbers in the country during this time. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. And so I'm just going to give the panelists, if you do have something to say, a closing remark, you're more than welcome to use this opportunity to quickly, 30 seconds, say something. Are there any takers? Okay, I think everybody's all worded out. Thank you so much. Thank you for to our viewers for tuning in. We hope that you continue these conversations, especially with the people that you're speaking about. It's one thing to be speaking about people who live in abusive homes or refugees, but to not be engaging with them and just speaking on their behalf, then no real work is being done there. So we hope that you continue these conversations in your spaces, and you remain, critical, but you also, as has been mentioned, you look after yourself. You remember that this is a time when you can make it about you in order to make sure that you're okay. Yes, thank you very much to UNASA and Amnesty for moving their human rights conference to this platform, and for allowing us to continue to engage and have meaningful conversations. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to the end of this panel discussion.